Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list on June 7, 1999, initially for his role in the 1998 embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania that killed 224 people and wounded thousands more. However, it was his orchestration of the September 11, 2001 attacks that would cement his place as America's #1 enemy and lead to the largest manhunt in human history. The morning of September 11, 2001 began like any other for millions of Americans, but by the day's end, the nation would be forever changed. The coordinated terrorist attacks involved 19 al-Qaeda operatives who hijacked 4 commercial airliners, using them as guided missiles against symbols of American power and prosperity. 2 planes struck the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, causing both towers to collapse within hours. A 3rd plane slammed into the Pentagon, the heart of America's military establishment, while a 4th, United Flight 93, crashed in a field in Pennsylvania after passengers heroically fought back against their hijackers. The attacks resulted in the deaths of 2,977 people from 93 nations, making it the deadliest terrorist attack in world history and the single deadliest incident for firefighters and law enforcement officers in U.S. history. The economic impact was equally staggering, with immediate damages estimated in the tens of billions of dollars and long-term economic effects reaching into the trillions. In the aftermath of 9/11, bin Laden became the focal point of America's war on terror, a global campaign that would reshape international relations and domestic policy for decades to come. The FBI offered a $25 million reward for information leading to his capture, the largest bounty in the Bureau's history. His al-Qaeda network, which he had built over more than a decade, was declared a terrorist organization, and nations worldwide were pressured to either assist in his capture or face the consequences of harboring terrorists. The end came on May 2, 2011, when U.S. Navy SEALs conducted Operation Neptune Spear, a daring raid on a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, where intelligence had finally located bin Laden. The operation, personally authorized by President Barack Obama, lasted approximately 40 minutes and resulted in bin Laden's death. Robert William Fisher. The name Robert William Fisher represents one of the most chilling and enduring mysteries on the FBI's most wanted list, a case that combines family annihilation with sophisticated evasion tactics that have confounded investigators for over 2 decades. Fisher's story is particularly disturbing because it involves the calculated murder of his own family, followed by a disappearance so complete that many question whether he is still alive. On April 10, 2001, the bodies of Mary Fisher and her 2 children, Brittany and Bobby, were discovered in their Scottsdale, Arizona home. The scene that greeted first responders was one of unimaginable horror. All 3 family members had been shot in the head, and the house had been rigged to explode, with a gas line cut and pilot lights left burning. The explosion and subsequent fire were clearly intended to destroy evidence, but the blast occurred sooner than expected, preserving enough forensic evidence to piece together the crime. Robert Fisher, a 40-year-old Navy veteran and medical technician, was immediately identified as the prime suspect. Friends and family described a man who was increasingly controlling and obsessed with maintaining the appearance of a perfect family. Behind closed doors, however, Fisher was reportedly emotionally and possibly physically abusive, particularly toward his wife Mary, who had been considering divorce. The investigation revealed that Fisher had been planning his crime for some time. He had withdrawn money from bank accounts and gathered outdoor survival gear, suggesting he had been preparing for life as a fugitive. His background as an outdoorsman and Navy veteran gave him skills that would prove invaluable in evading capture. Fisher was an experienced hunter and fisherman who was intimately familiar with the wilderness areas of Arizona and the American Southwest. Fisher was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list on June 29, 2002, and a $100,000 reward was offered for information leading to his capture. The case generated enormous media attention, partly because of its shocking nature and partly because Fisher seemed to have vanished without a trace. His SUV was found abandoned in the Tonto National Forest, but despite extensive searches involving helicopters, dogs, and ground teams, no sign of Fisher was found. The case took an unexpected turn in 2021 when Fisher was removed from the FBI's 10 most wanted list after 2 decades, not because he was captured, but because the FBI needed to make room for other fugitives and believed that the extensive publicity had run its course. Whitey Bulger. Born in South Boston in 1929, Bulger grew up in the working-class Irish neighborhoods that would later become his criminal empire. His early life was marked by petty crime and violence, leading to multiple arrests and eventually a stint in federal prison. It was during his time in Alcatraz in the 1950s that Bulger reportedly underwent psychological testing and possibly participated in CIA experiments involving LSD, experiences that may have contributed to his later psychological profile as a calculating and paranoid criminal leader. Upon his release from prison, Bulger began his rise through the ranks of Boston's Irish organized crime scene. By the 1970s, he had become the leader of the Winter Hill Gang, a loose confederation of criminals that controlled much of the illegal activity in South Boston, including loan sharking, bookmaking, drug trafficking, and extortion. Beginning in 1975, Bulger became an informant for the FBI, providing information about his rivals, particularly members of the Italian-American Mafia in Boston. This relationship was cultivated by FBI agent John Connolly, who had grown up in the same South Boston neighborhoods as Bulger. The FBI ignored evidence of Bulger's involvement in murders, drug trafficking, and other serious crimes, choosing instead to protect their valuable informant. This protection extended so far that Bulger was tipped off to pending indictments, allowing him to flee Boston in December 1994, just before federal charges were filed against him. Bulger was indicted in 1999 and added to the FBI's 10 most wanted list in August of that year. The charges against him included 19 counts of murder, extortion, money laundering, and drug dealing. Despite a $2 million reward for his capture, Bulger managed to remain a fugitive for 16 years, living quietly in Santa Monica, California, with his longtime companion, Catherine Gregg. The extent of Bulger's crimes became clear during his eventual trial. He was suspected of involvement in at least 19 murders, often killing people who posed a threat to his organization or who simply knew too much about his operations. Bulger's life as a fugitive ended on June 22, 2011, when he was arrested in Santa Monica after a tip from a former beauty queen who recognized him from publicity photos. In 2013, Bulger was convicted on 31 of 32 criminal counts, including racketeering, extortion, and involvement in 11 murders. He was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 5 years. His conviction was seen as a measure of justice not only for his crimes, but also for the corruption within the FBI that had allowed him to operate with impunity for so many years. Ted Kaczynski. Born in 1942 in Chicago, Kaczynski displayed extraordinary intellectual gifts from an early age. He was accepted to Harvard University at age 16, where he excelled academically but struggled socially. During his time at Harvard, he participated in psychological experiments conducted by Professor Henry Murray, studies that some researchers believe may have contributed to his later psychological development and anti-technology worldview. After earning his PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan, Kaczynski became the youngest professor ever hired by the University of California, Berkeley in 1967. However, his academic career was short-lived. In 1969, he abruptly resigned from his position and retreated to a primitive cabin in rural Montana, where he began developing the anti-technology philosophy that would later drive his bombing campaign. The Unabomber's first attack occurred on May 26, 1978, when a package bomb injured Northwestern University security officer Terry Marker. This would be the beginning of a campaign that would span nearly 2 decades and claim 3 lives while injuring 23 others. Kaczynski's targets were primarily individuals involved in technology, industrialization, and what he perceived as the destruction of nature and human freedom. Kaczynski meticulously crafted each explosive device by hand, often using materials that couldn't be easily traced. His bombs became increasingly sophisticated over time, incorporating anti-tampering devices and mechanisms designed to cause maximum damage to their intended targets. The FBI launched one of the longest and most expensive investigations in its history, eventually involving more than 150 agents and generating more than 20,000 pages of documents. The task force, known as Unabomb, University and Airline Bomber, pursued thousands of leads and investigated countless suspects, but Kaczynski's careful operational security and isolated lifestyle made him nearly impossible to track. In 1995, he sent a 35,000-word manifesto titled Industrial Society and Its Future to several newspapers. demanding that it be published in exchange for ending his bombing campaign. The Washington Post and the New York Times jointly published the manifesto on September 19, 1995, a decision that proved crucial to Kaczynski's capture. David Kaczynski, Ted's younger brother, recognized the writing style and philosophical arguments as remarkably similar to letters he had received from his brother over the years. After months of agonizing internal debate, David contacted the FBI with his suspicions. On April 3, 1996, FBI agents arrested Ted Kaczynski at his primitive cabin in Lincoln, Montana. During his trial, Kaczynski attempted to represent himself and initially pled not guilty, but eventually accepted a plea agreement to avoid the death penalty. In May 1998, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and was incarcerated at ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado. Eric Robert Rudolph. Born in 1966 in Merritt Island, Florida, Rudolph was raised in a family that held strong anti-government and white supremacist beliefs. After his father's death when Eric was 19, his mother moved the family to rural North Carolina, where young Rudolph became immersed in survivalist culture and extremist ideology. He developed extensive knowledge of wilderness survival and explosives, skills that would later serve him well both as a terrorist and as a fugitive. Rudolph's first and most infamous attack occurred on July 27, 1996. During the Summer Olympics in Atlanta. A pipe bomb exploded in Centennial Olympic Park, killing spectator Alice Hawthorne and injuring 111 others. The bombing shocked the world and cast a shadow over what was supposed to be a celebration of international unity and athletic achievement. The attack also resulted in the death of cameraman Meli Uzunyol, who suffered a fatal heart attack while running to cover the explosion. Initially, the investigation focused on security guard Richard Jewell, who had discovered the bomb and helped evacuate the area before the explosion. Jewell was wrongly suspected and subjected to intense media scrutiny before being cleared months later. Rudolph's bombing campaign continued with attacks on abortion clinics and a gay nightclub. On January 16, 1997, he bombed an abortion clinic in Atlanta, and on February 21, 1997, he attacked the Other Side Lounge, a gay nightclub, also in Atlanta. A year later, on January 29, 1998, he bombed the New Woman All-Women Healthcare Clinic in Birmingham, Alabama, killing security guard Robert Sanderson and severely injuring nurse Emily Lyons. The Birmingham bombing provided the first solid evidence, linking Rudolph to the attacks. Eyewitnesses saw him fleeing the scene and his truck was spotted in the area. A massive manhunt was launched in the mountains of western North Carolina where Rudolph had fled. Rudolph was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list on May 5, 1998, with a reward of up to $1 million offered for information leading to his capture. Despite the intensive search efforts, which included helicopters, dogs, thermal imaging equipment, and ground teams combing thousands of square miles of rugged terrain, Rudolph seemed to vanish into the wilderness. For more than 5 years, Rudolph lived as a fugitive in the mountains he knew so well. He survived by raiding cabins and dumpsters, stealing supplies from local residents, and using his extensive knowledge of the terrain to avoid capture. Rudolph's life as a fugitive came to an end on May 31, 2003, when he was arrested by rookie police officer Jeffrey Postel behind a grocery store in Murphy, North Carolina. The arrest was almost anticlimactic. Rudolph was rummaging through a dumpster for food when Officer Postel spotted him. Following his arrest, Rudolph eventually agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole, thus avoiding the death penalty. As part of his plea agreement, he led authorities to hidden caches of explosives in the North Carolina mountains and provided details about his crimes. Daniel Andreas Sandiego. Born in 1978, Sandiego grew up in suburban California and became involved in animal rights activism at a young age. He was a strict vegan who became increasingly radicalized in his opposition to what he saw as institutional animal cruelty. Sandiego's criminal career began on August 28, 2003, when 2 bombs exploded at biotechnology companies in Northern California. The first explosion occurred at Chiron Corporation in Emeryville, followed by a second bomb at Shackley Corporation in Pleasanton. His most dangerous attack came a month later, on September 26, 2003, when he placed 2 bombs at the Chiron Corporation. The first bomb was designed to explode and draw first responders to the scene, while the second was intended to detonate when emergency personnel arrived. This secondary device, equipped with nails as shrapnel, represented a clear escalation in Sandiego's willingness to harm or kill people in service of his cause. The FBI's investigation into these bombings led them to identify Sandiego as the primary suspect. He was indicted in federal court on charges related to the bombings, but by the time time authorities moved to arrest him, he had disappeared. His vanishing act was so complete that many suspected he had received assistance from underground networks of animal rights and environmental activists. San Diego was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list on April 21, 2009, making him the first domestic terrorist to be placed on the list for crimes related to animal rights extremism. The FBI offered a reward of up to $250,000 for information leading to his capture, reflecting the seriousness with which federal authorities viewed his crimes and the threat he posed. The search for San Diego spanned more than a decade and covered multiple continents. The FBI pursued leads across Europe, particularly in countries with strong animal rights movements. But San Diego seemed to stay one step ahead of international law enforcement efforts. San Diego's time as a fugitive finally ended on August 19, 2024, when he was arrested in the United Kingdom. British authorities, working in cooperation with the FBI, apprehended him after years of international investigation. Jason Derek Brown. Born in 1969 into a Mormon family in California, Brown grew up with advantages that should have set him up for legitimate success. He was described as charming, intelligent, and ambitious. With Hollywood good looks and a natural ability to connect with people, Brown's early adult life was marked by grandiose schemes and failed business ventures. He had dreams of becoming an actor and living a luxury lifestyle, but lacked the patience or work ethic to achieve these goals through legitimate means. Instead, he turned to fraud and theft, using his charm and good looks to con investors and creditors. As Brown's financial situation became increasingly desperate, his crimes escalated. He began passing bad checks and engaging in various forms of fraud, but these relatively minor crimes weren't generating the kind of money needed to maintain the lavish lifestyle he craved. On November 29, 2004, Brown committed the crime that would land him on the FBI's most wanted list. He approached armored car guard Keith Palomares outside a movie theater in Phoenix, Arizona, and shot him at close range before stealing a bag containing $56,000. The murder of Keith Palomares was particularly callous. Palomares was simply doing his job, collecting money from the movie theater, when Brown approached him from behind and shot him multiple times. The surveillance footage showed Brown calmly taking the money bag and walking away, displaying a chilling lack of remorse or concern for the life he had just taken. Brown was indicted for murder and armed robbery and was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list on December 8, 2007. By that time, he had already been a fugitive for more than 3 years, and the trail had grown cold. The FBI offered a reward of up to $200,000 for information leading to his capture, later increased to $1 million. There have been numerous reported sightings of Brown over the years, from California to Utah to international locations, but none have been confirmed. Some investigators believe he may have fled to Europe or Central America, while others think he might be hiding in plain sight somewhere in the United States, possibly having undergone plastic surgery to alter his appearance. Alexis Flores. Flores first came to law enforcement attention in the 1990s when he was deported from the United States for immigration violations. However, like many criminals who operate in the shadows of society, he found ways to return and continue his predatory behavior. His criminal history began with relatively minor offenses, but escalated dramatically to include some of the most serious crimes against children. The crime that placed Flores on the FBI's most wanted list was the murder of 5-year-old Iriana DeJesus in Philadelphia in September 2000. Iriana was found strangled in the basement of an abandoned apartment building, and forensic evidence linked Flores to the crime scene. The brutality of the crime and the age of the victim shocked even experienced investigators and galvanized the law enforcement community's determination to bring Flores to justice. DNA evidence collected from the crime scene provided a definitive link between Flores and the murder, but by the time authorities identified him as the prime suspect, he had once again disappeared. This pattern of violence followed by disappearance would become Flores' signature, making him one of the most elusive criminals on the FBI's radar. Flores was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list on June 2, 2007, nearly 7 years after Iriana's murder. The delay in adding him to the list reflected the time it took to definitively link him to the crime and exhaust other investigative avenues. The FBI offered a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading to his capture, emphasizing the priority placed on finding someone who poses such a direct threat to children. The investigation into Flores has revealed a pattern of predatory behavior that likely spans decades in multiple jurisdictions. Law enforcement agencies believe he may be responsible for additional crimes against children that have not yet been definitively linked to him. him, this possibility has made his capture even more urgent, as each day he remains free potentially puts more children at risk. Flores is believed to be living under assumed identities, possibly in Central America, taking advantage of his ability to blend into Spanish-speaking communities and his knowledge of how to avoid law enforcement detection. Yasser Abdel Said. Born in Egypt, Said immigrated to the United States where he eventually settled in the Dallas, Texas area with his family. Over the years, he became increasingly controlling and abusive toward his wife and daughters, behavior that family members and friends would later describe as escalating in both frequency and severity. This pattern of domestic abuse would ultimately culminate in an act of violence so shocking that it would capture national attention. On January 1st, 2008, Said shot and killed his teenage daughters, 18-year-old Amina and 17-year-old Sarah, in what investigators believe was an honor killing, motivated by his perception that his daughters had become too Americanized and were dating boys of whom he disapproved. The murders occurred in Irving, Texas, in Said's taxicab, where the girls' bodies were discovered. The circumstances surrounding the murders were particularly heartbreaking. Sarah Said managed to call 911 before dying, telling the operator that she was dying and that her father had shot her. This final call provided crucial evidence linking Said to the murders and gave voice to the victims in their final moments. The 911 recording became a key piece of evidence that would help secure Said's eventual conviction. Following the murders, Said immediately fled the area, beginning a life as a fugitive that would last for more than 12 years. His disappearance was so complete that many investigators wondered whether he had fled the country to Egypt or other Middle Eastern nations where he might have family connections or support networks. Said was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list on December 4, 2014, more than 6 years after the murders. The delay in adding him to the list reflected the extensive investigation required to build a case against him and the initial belief that he might have fled the country. The FBI offered a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading to his capture. Said's time as a fugitive came to an end on August 26, 2020, when he was arrested in Justin, Texas, just northwest of Dallas. The arrest came as a surprise to many who had assumed he might have fled the country or died during his years in hiding. Instead, investigators discovered that he had been living relatively close to the scene of his crimes, hidden in plain sight. During his trial in 2022, Said was convicted of capital murder for the deaths of his daughters and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Rafael Caro Quintero. Born in 1952 in rural Mexico, Caro Quintero grew up in poverty and turned to drug trafficking as a young man. By the 1980s, he had become one of the founders of the Guadalajara Cartel, one of Mexico's most powerful drug trafficking organizations. Caro Quintero's criminal empire came crashing down in 1985 following his involvement in the kidnapping, torture, and murder of DEA agent Enrique "Kiki" Camarena. Camarena had been working undercover in Mexico to investigate the Guadalajara Cartel's operations when he was abducted by cartel members. The agent was subjected to horrific torture over the course of several days before being killed, a crime that shocked both the DEA and the Mexican government. The murder of Agent Camarena represented a direct attack on American law enforcement and led to one of the largest international investigations in DEA history. The case, known as Operation Leyenda, involved hundreds of agents and millions of dollars in investigative resources as authorities worked to identify and prosecute everyone involved in Camarena's murder. Caro Quintero was arrested in Costa Rica in 1985 and extradited to Mexico, where he was convicted of Camarena's murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. In a shocking turn of events, Caro Quintero was released from Mexican prison on August 9, 2013, after a Mexican court ruled that he had been improperly tried in federal court rather than state court. Within hours of his release, Caro Quintero was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, making him the first person to be placed on the list immediately after being freed from prison. The FBI offered an unprecedented $20 million reward for information leading to his capture, reflecting both the seriousness of his original crimes and the potential threat he posed upon his release. For nearly a decade, Caro Quintero managed to evade capture despite being one of the world's most wanted men. Intelligence reports suggested he was hiding in the rugged mountains of his home state of Sinaloa, protected by loyal followers and using his extensive knowledge of the terrain to avoid the military and police units units searching for him. Caro Quintero's decade as a fugitive finally ended on July 15, 2022, when he was captured by Mexican Marines in a remote area of Sinaloa. The operation that led to his capture was the result of months of intelligence gathering and coordination between Mexican and American authorities. His arrest was seen as a major victory in the ongoing effort to bring justice for Agent Camarena's murder. Following his capture, the United States immediately began extradition proceedings, seeking to bring Caro Quintero to American soil to face federal drug trafficking charges. His case represents not only the pursuit of justice for a murdered DEA agent, but also the broader American commitment to holding accountable those who profit from the drug trade that has caused so much violence and suffering on both sides of the border. If you enjoyed watching this video, then go ahead and click on any of the cards on your screen for more.